currently on a break with my 20 boyfriend, 19M, and am considering leaving him because of how he was when I was pregnant. The beginning of our relationship felt like something out of a dream, the kind of connection that sets your whole world alight. It was intoxicating, overwhelming in the best possible way, a warmth that wrapped around me like a cocoon, making me believe that maybe, just maybe, I had found a safe place to land. I had never been someone with a steady mind, never the kind of person who walked through life without carrying ghosts in my shadow. My past, my anxieties, my fears, they clung to me like weights I couldn't shake off, and I thought love would be the thing that made them bearable. But love, as I soon came to realize, does not always arrive in the form you need it. From the very beginning, I noticed his emotional distance. Not in the obvious ways, not in the kind that sends up immediate red flags, but in the small moments where silence felt heavier than words. When I cried, when I laid my soul bare, when I needed comfort in the form of reassurance, his response was always the same: I don't know what to say. At first, I tried to tell myself it was just who he was. Not everyone knows how to handle someone else's pain. Not everyone can speak the language of comfort fluently. But over time, that excuse wore thin. It wasn't just that he didn't know what to say, it was that he didn't try. He never reached for me, never attempted to hold the weight of my burdens alongside me. And yet, I stayed. I stayed because the good moments made me forget the bad, because the loneliness that came with him still felt preferable to the loneliness I had known before him. Then May arrived, and with it, the news that changed everything. I was pregnant. The word alone sent an ice-cold shiver through my body, a terror that wrapped around my throat and squeezed tight. It wasn't excitement, it wasn't joy, it was fear, pure and unrelenting, because I knew what had to come next. There was no choice for me, no alternative path to take. My life could not accommodate this, and so I had to face what felt inevitable, an abortion. But knowing what had to be done didn't make it any less horrifying. Almost immediately, my body turned against me. Hyperemesis struck with a force I wasn't prepared for, leaving me weak, empty, a ghost of myself. Food became my enemy, every bite threatening to come back up the moment it touched my lips. The only thing I could stomach were popsicles, the cold numbing my tongue, tricking my body into thinking I had eaten. The weight slipped off me like sand through fingers, my energy draining along with it. I was alone in this. I had no one to turn to except my boyfriend, the one person who knew, the one person I needed to be there for me. But he wasn't. He had exams, he told me. He had stress of his own. He was busy. I heard every excuse and tried to swallow my disappointment, telling myself that maybe I was asking too much, that maybe I should be more understanding. But understanding didn't make the nausea go away. It didn't keep me upright when my body felt like collapsing. And it certainly didn't stop the resentment from creeping in, slow but persistent, like ink bleeding into water. The one time we spent together during that period is a memory that still burns with frustration. We were at his house, watching a movie, and the scent of everything around me felt unbearable. The air itself seemed to reek, thick with odors my oversensitive nose couldn't handle. Even him. The smell of his skin, his clothes, whatever cologne or detergent he had used, it was too much. So I told him, as gently as I could, to move a little further away. I told him, as honestly as I could, that everything smelled bad to me. That it wasn't him, it was my hormones. But instead of understanding, instead of meeting me with patience, he withdrew into himself, silent and offended. It baffled me then, and it baffles me now. How could he make my suffering about him? How could he turn my body's betrayal into something personal? I had to sit there, miserable and exhausted, while also reassuring him, trying to comfort him when I was the one drowning. And months later, when the memory resurfaced, when he brought it up again, still holding onto the hurt like a child clutching a broken toy, I had to remind him all over again that it was never about him. That it was my body, my sickness, my pain. And yet, that moment became a stain between us, a reminder of how little he understood me, how little he tried. I wish I could say that was the worst of it. That his emotional unavailability was something I could work around, something that could be patched up with enough time and patience. But that was only the beginning of the cracks forming in the foundation of what we had. Because if he couldn't handle my nausea, if he couldn't handle the smallest inconveniences that came with my suffering, how could he possibly be there for me when the worst was yet to come? I remember that phone call so vividly, like a wound that never quite scabbed over. It was late May, and I was already teetering on the edge of exhaustion physically, emotionally, mentally. The pregnancy had drained me in ways I never imagined, and the thought of what lay ahead filled me with an almost primal fear. It wasn't just the procedure itself, it was everything that came with it. The loneliness. The silence. The knowledge that after all the pain, I would have to keep going as if nothing had happened. And so, I called him, because despite everything, he was supposed to be the one person who would stand by me. The one person who would tell me that I wasn't going through this alone. I told him as plainly as I could that I needed him. That this wasn't something I could endure on my own. That I was already hanging by a thread, and I needed to know he would catch me if I fell. And then, because I had spent far too long learning to brace for disappointment, I made it clear that I couldn't afford his usual, empty refrain of I don't know what to say. I needed presence, not avoidance. Support, not withdrawal. And then I made a mistake. A small, insignificant truth that, to him, might as well have been a betrayal. I mentioned that I had confided in a friend. It wasn't even a deep, detailed confession. Just an acknowledgement that I had turned to someone for comfort, that I had sought out reassurance in a place I knew I would find it. Because I couldn't keep carrying this burden in silence. Because I was drowning, and I needed more than one person to pull me back to the surface. He went quiet. Not just the pause of someone considering their words, but the thick, suffocating silence of a man who had shut himself away entirely. When he finally spoke, his voice was clipped, tight with restrained anger. He told me that really pissed him off. That he needed to cool off for 30 minutes. As if my reality, my suffering was an inconvenience to him. As if the weight of my pain was somehow heavier for him than it was for me. An hour passed before I heard from him again. Not 30 minutes. Not a voice filled with regret or understanding. Just a cold, detached message saying he didn't have the mind or energy for this. And then he was gone, retreating into the safety of his Discord server, hiding among his friends, playing games while I sat alone, my hands shaking, my breath uneven, wondering how the person who was supposed to care about me could so easily turn his back. I begged him. I begged him to talk to me, to at least tell me what he was feeling, to give me anything other than silence. I felt like an idiot, like a desperate, pathetic fool clawing at a locked door, begging to be let in. But he didn't just ignore me, he lashed out. I don't like the person I am when I need space. Stop talking to me. And still, I didn't stop. Because how could I? How could I, when I was falling apart, when I had no one else to turn to? But every time I tried to reach him, he pulled further away. His words became colder, harsher. And I, already raw, already broken, was left with nothing but the sound of my own sobs, the empty echo of my pleas unanswered. I know I crossed a line. I know I pushed him when he wanted space. But was I supposed to endure this alone? Was I supposed to suffer in silence, to swallow my terror just because he found my pain too much to bear? I wasn't asking him to fix anything. I wasn't expecting him to make it all go away. I just wanted to hear that I wasn't alone. And then the day came. The day I had been dreading, the day I had counted down to with growing nausea and dread. My abortion. There is nothing light, nothing simple about the process. No part of it is easy, no part of it feels like a relief in the moment. The pain was sharp, twisting, relentless. The nausea was unbearable, my body shaking from exhaustion, my mind too clouded with misery to process anything beyond the sheer emptiness of it all. The only moment of absurdity, the only fleeting second of anything close to humor was when my stomach, tight with cramps, suddenly released the most disgusting, earth-shattering fart I had ever experienced. And somehow, in the wake of that ridiculousness, my pain subsided just enough for me to breathe again. That was the funniest moment of my abortion. That was all I had. The rest of it was agony. And he wasn't there. He wasn't there to hold my hand. He wasn't there to tell me it would be okay, even if it wouldn't be. He wasn't there in the way I needed him to be. But my best friend was. She spent money she didn't have on me. She delivered everything I needed, took time out of her life to make sure I wasn't alone. She brought me pregnancy tests. She brought me popsicles. She stayed by my side when my body felt like it was turning against me. She did everything he didn't. A stranger, a kind Uber driver, showed me more care and compassion than the person who was supposed to love me. He helped me clean up after I threw up in his car, treating me with more patience and warmth than the man I had spent over a year loving. The pharmacist spoke to me with more sympathy. My classmates, my tutors, all of them showed me more kindness, more understanding than the person who should have been my safe place. And that, I think, is what haunts me the most. Not just the pain, not just the grief, but the realization that I had to look elsewhere for comfort. That I had to seek out strangers for the reassurance that should have come effortlessly from him. I told him, months later, that I still wasn't okay. That I still felt the weight of his absence. That I still carried the hurt like a scar that refused to fade. And his response? It's been a while. I feel sorry. I promise never to do that again. So why are you still upset? As if time alone should have erased the pain. As if a handful of words, spoken without depth or sincerity, could rewrite what had already been done. As if I should have been able to forget, just because he wanted to move on. I had always imagined, in some distant corner of my mind, that love meant grand gestures in moments of pain. That if you were suffering, the person who loved you would fall to their knees, would plead for your forgiveness, would hold you so tightly that the world itself felt less terrifying. That the person who had hurt you would fight to make it right. Instead, I got a Discord call. A short, dismissive conversation. A promise made too late, spoken too easily. And deep down, I know the truth. I will never fully get over this. No matter how much he changes, no matter how hard he tries now, there will always be a stain on this relationship, a memory that will never quite fade. Because when I needed him most, he wasn't there. And I don't know if I can ever forgive that. The day of the blood test should have been one of those moments that bonded us. A defining point in our relationship, where he showed up for me, where I could feel just for a second that I wasn't carrying this weight alone. But from the moment we stepped into the clinic, the air between us felt wrong. I had felt weak that morning, my body barely functioning under the unrelenting waves of nausea and dizziness, and the thought of the needle, the very act of sitting in that chair and waiting for my own blood to confirm the reality I already knew, made my hands tremble. And he was just there. Physically present, but emotionally absent, an awkward shell of a person sitting beside me, avoiding my gaze, shifting uncomfortably as though just being in that space was too much for him. I kept looking at him, hoping for something, some flicker of concern, some indication that he was actually with me in this moment. Instead, I got nothing. Not a squeeze of my hand, not a comforting word, not even a forced attempt to make things feel less suffocating. Just silence. And so, like always, it was me who had to carry the conversation. Me, the one whose body was betraying her. Me, the one whose mind was breaking under the weight of what was happening. Me, the one who could barely stand without feeling like I was going to collapse. I had to keep talking. I had to make things feel normal, to break the unbearable awkwardness he brought into the room. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab his hand, shake him, make him see me, make him realize that I wasn't just some distant acquaintance going through a hard time. I was his girlfriend, his partner, carrying his child, facing the hardest decision of my life, and he couldn't even look me in the eyes. Have I just been delusional? Have I been so poisoned by the idea of love I had crafted in my head that I expected too much? I always thought that in moments like this, a real man would soften, would instinctively know that this is when you set everything else aside, when you hold your partner through her pain, when you make sure she knows that no matter how bad things get, she is not alone. Was it really too much to expect even the smallest fraction of that? Had I read too many books, watched too many movies, gotten lost in the unrealistic fantasy that when you love someone, you do everything in your power to make sure they feel it? The realization hit me like a slow, dragging tide. My attraction to him was beginning to wane. It was not an immediate severing of emotion, not a sharp, clean break. It was erosion, steady and merciless, wearing down the parts of me that had once adored him. The way I used to look at him, the way I once craved his presence, it was all beginning to dull, the edges of my love turning blunt with disappointment. I stopped going to him for comfort. Maybe it was subconscious at first. Maybe I just knew that reaching for him would only lead to another letdown. The safety I once sought in him had been proven false, and there was only so much rejection I could take before my body, my mind, my very soul learned to stop expecting anything at all. He apologized, I think, at some point. But it wasn't the kind of apology that meant anything. It was a throwaway comment, something small and weak, the kind of thing you say when you just want to move past something without actually making it right. I can't even remember the words, just the emptiness of them. A brief acknowledgement of my pain, but not nearly enough to actually heal it. Time passed. The wound festered. I buried it, tried to move forward, but the resentment was always there, lying beneath the surface, waiting to rise. 2 months later, when the weight of it became too heavy to keep inside, I told him. I told him that I was still hurt, that I still felt abandoned by him, that what he did, or rather, what he didn't do, was something I couldn't just let go of. And his response? It's been a while. I feel sorry. I promise never to do that again. So why are you still upset? I think something inside me cracked at that moment. The sheer audacity of it. The way he spoke as if pain had an expiration date, as if wounds should naturally seal themselves shut after enough time has passed. As if he got to decide when I was allowed to stop feeling hurt. As if his quick, emotionless apology should have been enough to erase the ache he had left behind. I wanted him to fight for me. I wanted him to see how deeply he had wounded me, to understand that real apologies aren't just words tossed into the void, they are felt. They are earned. They are spoken with a weight that carries the intent to repair, not just to dismiss. I needed the kind of grand apology that made up for everything. I needed him to fall to his knees, to beg for forgiveness, to look at me with the desperation of someone who knew they had nearly lost the most important thing in their life. I needed him to plead, to prove to me that he understood what he had done, that he felt the depth of my pain. I needed to see the regret in his eyes, to hear it in his voice, to know that my suffering had actually reached him. Instead, I got a few quick words on a Discord call. A half-hearted attempt at an apology spoken in a space that didn't even feel real, his voice filtered through a mic, emotionless and detached. As if this was something that could be fixed as easily as a dropped call, a quick reset. I could hear the impatience in his voice. The silent frustration. The unspoken "can we move on already?" And I felt sick. Because no matter how many times I replayed the past in my head, no matter how much I tried to justify, to rationalize, to forgive, one thing remained brutally clear. I would never get over this. I could push it down. I could pretend. I could let time do its best to smooth over the jagged edges, but that stain would never disappear. Because when I needed him most, he wasn't there. Because when I was at my lowest, he made me feel like I was burdening him. Because when I cried out for him, he turned away. And no matter how much he changed, no matter how much he tried to be better now, I would always know that the moment had come and gone, and he had failed me. That is not something time can erase. That is not something love can fix. The weight of everything I had been through, everything I had endured, settled in my chest like a dull, suffocating pressure. It wasn't just the pregnancy. It wasn't just the abortion. It was the realization that at every moment where I had needed love, support, and care, I had been met with silence, avoidance, or excuses. And in contrast, the kindness of strangers, of my best friend, of people who owed me nothing, it only highlighted just how deeply he had failed me. The Uber driver who helped me clean up after I threw up in his car, treating me with patience and warmth. The pharmacists who spoke to me like I was a person, not just another customer, offering advice and genuine concern. My classmates who wished me well, my tutors who showed me respect and care without even knowing the depths of what I was going through. My best friend, who stepped in where my boyfriend should have been, who spent her own money, her own time, who traveled across the city just to make sure I wasn't alone in my suffering. She did what love is supposed to do. She made sure I didn't drown. And yet, the person who was supposed to love me most, the one who had promised me love, couldn't do the same. He had excuses, of course. Always excuses. His mother tracked his transactions, so he couldn't send me money. He had exams, so he couldn't be present. He didn't know what to say, so he said nothing at all. He needed space, so he abandoned me in my worst moments. And now, months later, after all the damage had been done, he stood before me with tears in his eyes, telling me he was trying to change, trying to be better, trying to undo what had already been cemented in my mind as the truth, that when I needed him, he wasn't there. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to take his remorse and mold it into something that felt real, something I could hold onto. I wanted to convince myself that people could change, that maybe love could repair the damage left behind. But deep down, I knew. Some wounds don't heal. Some betrayals, because that's what this was, a betrayal of trust, of love, of partnership, don't disappear with time. Some things, once broken, can never quite be put back the way they were. I had spent so long making excuses for him, trying to justify his behavior, trying to rationalize why the man who was supposed to love me more than my best friend, more than strangers, had done so much less for me. And no matter how much he swore he would change, no matter how many tears he shed, no matter how much effort he put in now, it would never erase what had already happened. Because love isn't just about trying after the damage has been done. It's about showing up when it matters. And he hadn't. He had let me go through one of the most terrifying, painful, emotionally devastating experiences of my life alone. That is something I can never forget. I have tried to picture a future with him, a life where this doesn't weigh on me, where I can look at him without remembering what it felt like to cry into the void and receive nothing in return. I have tried to picture what it would be like to forgive him, to believe that his efforts now could erase his failures then. But I can't. Because this isn't just a moment in our past. This isn't a fight over something trivial, something that can be forgotten with time. This is the core of what a relationship is supposed to be: partnership, support, love, unwavering presence in times of need. And if he failed me then, what's stopping him from failing me again? What's stopping him from retreating into himself the next time I am struggling, the next time life hands me something I can't handle alone? I don't want to keep asking these questions. I don't want to spend my life wondering if the man I love will actually be there for me when I need him most. I don't want to live with this stain on our relationship, pretending it doesn't exist, pretending it doesn't still hurt. Because it does. And no matter how much I wish it didn't, no matter how much I tell myself that love should be enough, the truth is staring me in the face. Some things can't be undone. And I think, deep down, I already know what I need to do.